You're listening to the Catholic Wives Desiring Peace podcast. Today's episode is about navigating the T word and the A word, having this conversation with your husband. Are you a Catholic wife grappling with challenging in-laws? The Catholic Wives Desiring Peace podcast is your sanctuary for navigating these sometimes stormy seas of life with toxic in-laws, while being validated for what you've experienced. Join me, your host, Miriam Susan, a Catholic wife who's weathered nearly 3 decades of in-law drama, as we tackle the tough issues you're dealing with head on. Welcome to the Catholic Wives Desiring Peace podcast. Today's topic is about how we as wives can discuss some problematic behavior with our in-laws when your husband doesn't see it. And we're talking about the T word and the A word. Toxic and abuse or abusive are those words. These 2 words can very quickly shut down a conversation if your husband is not ready to hear these words. I know for us, for our own example, it took a long time for my husband to actually see his parents' actions as abusive. And we were discussing this topic just last week and talking about how he would have received these words if I had brought them up very early on in our relationship or in our marriage. And I know for sure that he would have argued against it being abuse because, like I said, it's only been within the last few years that he has come to realize that their behavior was abusive, even though he never had any physical abuse or any abuse that would leave marks. He definitely did suffer under some forms of abuse during his childhood, and then especially as he was an adult and we got married. Now, the word toxic, he said that he may have been more receptive to that word because of the word itself. Toxic meaning like a poison, something that, infects you and can cause damage. He said that he probably would have been a little more receptive to that word if I had even known to bring it up. But times have changed, and thankfully, I feel like people are just more aware of toxic behavior now than they were 30 years ago when we first met and started dating. I'd like to point out an analogy that I think will help clarify what's going on, and I'm calling it the nose blind analogy. When your husband has grown up with certain behaviors, it completely normalizes them. And it's very similar to if you grew up in a house where somebody was a smoker. You become nose blind to the fact that everything in that house smells like smoke. And chances are your clothes would smell like smoke even when you leave the house. The car would smell like smoke. But because that is the environment that you live in all the time, you do become nose blind to it. I know smoking is not quite as popular now as it was when I was growing up, and I am personally very thankful for that because I am allergic to cigarette smoke. My dad actually was a smoker for most of his life, and around the time I turned 8 years old, we discovered that I was allergic to it. So if he had to smoke, he had to smoke outside. He smoked on our back porch. He smoked in the garage, anywhere but inside the house. And I have no doubt that during those years when I was little and he was smoking inside the house, that my clothes smelled like smoke, but I didn't know it. I was nose blind to it. When our husbands are raised in a certain environment, in a certain family culture, they literally cannot detect what we as outsiders can see clearly. Now, because we were not raised in that kind of household and we are not nose blind to it, our fresh perspective is actually quite valuable and it should not be problematic, even though in reality, that's how it kind of plays out sometimes because we are seeing things from a different perspective. And neither his perspective nor our perspective is necessarily wrong, but we're just seeing things from very different vantage points. So let's talk about what our scripture reference is for today's episode. It comes from the book of St. James, chapter 1, verses 19, and this is from the New Revised Standard Version Catholic Edition, says, "Let everyone be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to anger." This scripture really highlights the importance of understanding different perspectives. We should always be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to anger. Does it always play out that way? No, because we are very human. But we can always look to the scripture for our guide and always strive for what it is trying to teach us. Let's be real. The words abuse and abusive, they can be very, very triggering. And triggering words don't always work for our husbands. They don't always work for us. When we say those words, when we say, your parents are so toxic, their behavior is so abusive, what you're going through is abuse. What your husband is probably actually hearing when we say these things might be some of the following. It might be that he's hearing you say, the people who raised me are bad people. He might be hearing you say that his entire childhood was damaging. He might hear, well, I shouldn't love the people who sacrificed for me. I've been blind or foolish for not seeing this. My judgment about important relationships is messed up. Those are some things that our husbands might internalize when we say things like, gosh, that was really toxic behavior that your mom did. Or your dad, when he was using the scriptures like that, that was abusive. Our husbands are not going to hear necessarily what we're actually saying because those words are so triggering. These kinds of words create a defensiveness instead of understanding when it comes to the situation with your in laws. It can activate his protective instincts towards his parents. If he thinks that you are being combative against his parents, then it is really quite natural for him to want to come to their defense. It also creates an atmosphere where there is this impossible choice between you and them. Now, granted, as wives, we think, well, that's an easy choice, right? He chose us, he married us, we are the obvious choice. Unfortunately, that's not how it always plays out. We have to remember this man has been trained by his parents to think and act a certain way for his entire life. And chances are he has been taught to be loyal to his family. And if we come in and we start saying things like they're being toxic, they're being abusive, he is going to feel like he has no choice. If he chooses you, then he feels like he's turning his back on his family. And yet, if he chooses his parents, then he's turning his back on the wife that he married and turning his back on the vows that he made at your wedding. Triggering words also can threaten his sense of identity and his sense of family connection. If you come out and start throwing the word abuse around, he can be very defensive and not want to say that he was abused because he doesn't want to be labeled as a victim, even though he is a victim if his parents were abusive. But there's a difference. I saw a short reel the other day, and it was highlighting that there's a difference in mindset between being a victim and staying in that victim mindset. A lot of our toxic in-laws, they love being in that victim mindset. And so if your husband is aware that there's something kind of funky going on with his parents, he probably wants to do everything but be a victim because he has seen his mom, he has seen his dad play the victim his whole life, and it's repulsive. So we have to think that if we start throwing these words around, and a lot of times we do it and we have no idea what kind of images, what kind of feelings, what kind of memories, whatever are being triggered when we use them with our husband. But it could really rock his sense of identity and the connection he has with his family. These triggering words also challenge his entire understanding of what normal family dynamics are. There's a pretty decent chance that your husband does have some genuinely good and positive memories from his childhood, from his teen years, from his young adult years. Your husband might hear these words and think, well, then was nothing from my childhood good? It wasn't all bad. So how can this be? And so there's this cognitive dissonance where it just doesn't make sense that someone who could seem so loving and show up for any parent-teacher meetings and go on vacation and do something fun could be that same person who is toxic and abusive. And then finally, these words can really feel like an attack on his ability to discern right from wrong, good from evil, and his intelligence. Very few men or women like to feel like they're not smart, like to feel like they're not able to discern basic things. And so, if we start using these words without understanding that they might be very triggering to our husbands, they could really hit his self confidence and make him think that he is just so lost, that he's so stupid because he did not see this behavior for what it actually is. Now, one of the biggest problems that I personally faced when it came to the toxicity and just the crazy making behavior of my in laws is the moving target problem. So let me explain what this moving target problem is. It is when your in laws keep changing certain expectations. So there's this mental exhaustion that comes because you're maybe trying to please your in laws. I think we all go through this stage where we do try our very best to please our in laws in this often feeble attempt to get them to like us, to get them to love us, to get them to approve of us. But they keep moving the target. And you cannot hit a target. You cannot even aim for a target if you don't know where it's going to be when you pull back your bow and sling that arrow. There is a constant adjustment that has to happen on our behavior to meet these unstated rules. There is this feeling that all the goalposts keep moving despite every effort that we put forth. And there's this massive mental drain of always being on alert for any kind of potential criticism because we didn't meet whatever that goal was, because we didn't meet whatever that expectation was. And then we often feel like we are walking on eggshells every little step. Fragile little things, fragile cracks are happening that we don't even know we're doing. And it really impacts our ability to be present in that moment, present with our husbands, present with our children, present with our husband's extended family, and just be there and experience whatever it is going on if it's good. But we're always walking on eggshells and we don't know. Is the shoe about to drop? Is something about to happen? Is he about to rage? Is she about to have a temper tantrum? We just don't know. And then there is this spiritual toll of constantly trying to earn their approval. And this is for your husband too. All of these things apply not just to us, but to our husbands too, of him feeling like he has to constantly adjust his behavior to try to meet whatever expectations his parents have, that he is trying and striving to be this wonderful son to his parents, but they keep changing the goalposts. He doesn't know where to aim. He doesn't know where to kick the ball because they're moving. And he does get drained, feeling like he always has to be on alert. Your husband, like mine, probably has this hypersensitivity to micro behaviors. And what do I mean by that? Well, if I ask him something or I respond to him in a certain tone of voice that I really mean nothing by it, maybe I sounded a little short because I was tired. Maybe I sounded a little miffed because I have a headache. But my husband will read into that a lot and think, okay, she is mad at me. Okay, what have I done? What have I messed up? And so when that applies to his parents, he's constantly on edge and constantly trying to figure out what is going on. He's trying to read the room, figure out what's going on with his parents because he does want to seek and receive their approval. But it's exhausting. It's spiritually, emotionally, and sometimes physically exhausting. Now, some of the common phrases that might get thrown at you if you bring these things up to your husband is he might say, well, that's just how mom is. Or you're being too sensitive. Or they didn't mean it that way. Or they're just trying to help. I have super helpful in laws. Very helpful. I'm very grateful for the many things that my mother in law and father in law did for us. They came in, my mother-in-law and sisters-in-law, they came in and basically, like, repainted our entire house when we moved close to them, and I'm super grateful for that. At the same time, there is this exchange that every good deed is going to be held against you if you decide to push back on something else. And so they're just trying to help. It's Yes, they might be trying to help, but there's often a motivation behind it that is not all that pure. So these responses can in turn make us as wives question our own perception because it creates a gap between whatever we experienced in certain situations and what your husband and his parents acknowledge happening. It makes you doubt your emotional responses and doubt your intuition. My intuition is very strong, and I would have conversations and walk away and think, What's happened?" I thought that I had a good read on this situation. I thought I had a good read on this person, and it totally gets flipped on me, and it's very difficult to understand. These kind of responses from our husbands can often leave us feeling like we're not seen and what we have experienced is totally invalidated. They also reinforce this idea that we are the problem, not the behavior that our in-laws are doing. And then it can also cause in us a spiritual confusion about our own worth and our own dignity. Because if we see things and we try to call them out, even if we try to call them out gently, and our husbands respond with, well, that's just how mom is. And it's like, what's wrong with me then? Why can't she just be kind to me? Why can't my father in law just accept me for who I am? And so it begins to cause us this confusion about our own worth and our own dignity as human beings. Now, one of the things that you probably picked up on, and maybe you haven't actually had words to describe it, is this hidden transformation of how your husband changes around his parents. Maybe his tone of voice and his body language shift subtly. Maybe his ability to make decisions becomes hesitant and he starts deferring and looking to his. This hidden transformation that our husbands undergo can also come out as your husband becoming more concerned with their approval than he usually is. And it can cause him to fall into the old family roles and dynamic almost automatically as soon as his parents walk through the door or as soon as you walk into the door of their home. And then it also shows that he has different priorities when you're alone together versus when he's with his parents. Sometimes it was like my husband's mind would almost be like wiped clean, but not totally clean, because all of a sudden the ideas that his parents are throwing out sound amazing when maybe we had a discussion previously and we had discussed that we were not going to do X, Y, and Z. Another aspect of this transformation that our husbands sometimes go through when they're around their parents is almost like time travel, where they return to their childhood patterns by unconsciously seeking his parents' approval, like when he was a child, and reverting to some learned behaviors that worked to keep the peace and limit the amount of chaos when he was growing up. It can also be him responding in some childhood emotional patterns, not adult reasoning. So he might be just acting more impulsively instead of taking time to think things out just because he's in the presence of his parents. Now, old family systems can be reactivating despite him being a grown man with a wife and or children. Holiday gatherings are especially prone to these kinds of behaviors when they revert back to this almost childlike state of wanting to be approved and trying to step back into the role of the dutiful son, even though he's a full grown adult. Now, I do want to make clear that this isn't weakness on your husband's part, but it is a deeply ingrained response. these patterns that he tends to fall into were formed before he had any conscious choice. There are neural pathways that have developed over time in his childhood, and they are extremely powerful. It is a well trodden path, and it is very difficult, not impossible, but it is very difficult to begin to have his thoughts go in a different path than what they're used to. His response is biological. Those neural pathways are actually physical pathways in his brain, and that's how the thoughts flow. There's actual biology. It's not just psychology. Now, our brains are wired to maintain a sense of family harmony for survival. So, when we understand these patterns, we can extend a level of compassion to our husbands and try not to be judgmental because we are fighting against a lifetime of training. Now, there is often a strong disconnect between our husband's confidence elsewhere and his behavior with his parents. The same man who is a leader at work all of a sudden becomes hesitant at home. This man can advocate strongly for the rights of others, but then struggle to do the same when it comes to your rights as a woman and mother and his wife and his children. The strength that he shows in other areas of his life seems to disappear when he's near his parents. And the disconnect causes both of you confusion and it creates tension because you know he is this strong man at church, but yet when it comes to his parents, he's almost too afraid to ask them if y'all could have dinner 30 minutes earlier than scheduled. Now, the frustration for us often comes with seeing our husband's potential versus the response that he has towards his parents. I think as women, we are almost ingrained to see the potential in others. We see the potential in our children, and oftentimes we see that potential in our husbands when we get married. And then we get married and we're disappointed that they're not growing at the same pace that we are growing. They're not changing at the same pace that we would like them to change because we were banking on that potential coming to fruition. And sometimes it doesn't, or sometimes it takes a really long time. So that can be very frustrating for us as the wives to see that he is this strong and capable and intelligent man to everybody else. But when it comes to his parents, he reverts almost back to his childlike ways of being a little boy. So let's understand what and why behind some new approaches that we can take with our husbands when it comes to using words like they're being toxic or they're being abusive. There can be a very big difference between what happens when you share your feelings versus making accusations. So when we make accusations, we trigger that defensiveness, we trigger that family connection where our husbands are going to want to defend their parents, right? So it's very different for him when he hears something like, I feel invisible when, whatever, versus your mom is really controlling. There's a very big difference there. Personal impact statements like that, like I feel invalidated, I feel ignored, I feel invisible. They open the doors to helping your husband understand what's going on. I feel stressed when your mom comes over and starts cleaning up the kitchen when I've spent all weekend cleaning it up. I feel invalidated when she completely ignores that I've been working all day and coming home and taking care of the kids when she makes comments about how the children need to have a more structured life. I feel invisible when your mom ignores my birthday and hers is just a few days before. And that's my own personal that's my own personal story. My mother-in-law and I have birthdays that are only a few days apart, less than a week apart. And there would be family gatherings when everybody would sing happy birthday to her and have presents and cake for her, and not a word was said about me. Not that I wanted the cake, not that I wanted the presents, not that I wanted everybody to sing happy birthday to me, because frankly, that's kind of embarrassing. But it was just the fact that our birthdays are so close together, and I was just not even acknowledged at all. And it kind of hurts because it makes you feel like you don't matter. Okay, perspective sharing matters a whole lot more than labeling. So when we label things as toxic, when we label things as abusive, it's not as helpful as trying to share our perspective. So the purpose behind sharing our perspective is to help him see our perspective, to see things through our eyes. And we have to understand that him seeing through our eyes, that has to come before he can change. That's how it works. We're not going to change, even for somebody that we love, unless we understand why. Now, there is value in seeking unity in perception because it allows us to really step into the other person's shoes and understand where they're coming from. And that does bring us together. So you need to think about what happens when you invite somebody to take your perspective versus demanding that they see things your way. It's very, very different. So, neutral observations accomplish the power of stating facts without attached judgments. You can say things like, I noticed that your mom changed her mind and decided that she was going to come visit on this day instead of this day, even though we've already made plans for the first time. That's very, very different than saying, I hate it when your mom changes plans. It's so frustrating because we make all these plans and then she changes it up and then we have to start all over again. You see the difference? The second one is very judgmental, might be how you actually feel, but is a whole lot more effective to speak to our husbands in a neutral way so that our emotion is taken out of it. Patterns tend to become more visible when we describe them very simply. And this approach reveals more about the situation over time, and it creates space for your husband to make his own conclusions. Now, what does this look like? For me, at one point, things were just getting out of hand with his parents. And so I decided that I was just going to sit down and I was going to write out all the weird things that had happened that I could remember. And I included some dates. And I did just the facts. I did the approximate date. I wrote down what happened, and that was it. I didn't write down how it made me feel. I didn't write down what I was assuming his parents were thinking. I just wrote down the facts. And when I presented nearly 8 pages of weird things to my husband, it was really life-changing because he began to see, number one, that there was a lot of stuff that was pretty weird that had happened in our marriage. And number two, it wasn't a list of my accusations. It was just, this is what's happened. Here it is in black and white. And it gave him an opportunity to kind of process what it all was without having to deal with my emotional baggage that came along with it. When you connect to his values as a person, as a human being, it becomes a lot more effective. When we connect things like, your mom and dad say that they want to get together with us as a family, but every time we invite them, something comes up. If his value is family time and he sees that, that's going to start being a red flag in his mind. He's going to start to realize, okay, yeah, we do make an effort to invite my parents over, and they never take us up on it. There's also the importance of honoring your husband's desire to be a good husband and a good son. They're not mutually exclusive. He can be a good husband and a good son. Unfortunately, sometimes those get a little skewed, and he runs to or defaults to being the good son above being a good husband. When we frame things through shared Catholic values, it can begin to open his heart. If it is important for your husband to spend time with family, then it's important to share things in a simple way so that he can become aware of them and tap into that faith that he has. Because if things aren't going the way that they should, chances are there is this almost spiritual angst that he might be experiencing where he knows that family is important. He knows that faith is important, but yet being around his parents doesn't bring that about, doesn't exemplify those values that he has. And this type of approach really helps to reveal his true priorities. Sadly, not all of our husbands are going to be receptive to these kinds of conversations. And so it is kind of a wake up call for us both to understand what our husband's true priorities are. If he does continue to put his mom and dad first, then I think it's time to really talk to a priest about what your next steps are going forward. Now, beyond just our relationship with our husbands, we have to think about the bigger picture. Are there children in the equation? If so, this behavior, the toxicity, the abusiveness, it's going to impact your children. It is impacting your children. It is going to impact how they internalize the way you, as their mother, are treated. It's going to impact what they learn and what they see about marriage relationships just from observing how you and your husband deal with this kind of stuff. It also impacts how they might replicate these patterns in their future families. What we model, our children tend to carry and take with them. The confusion that they experience when different rules apply between your house and your in laws will affect how they view different adults. And then all of this impacts our kids' sense of security when there's this ongoing tension. That was one thing that my youngest daughter said about our family's relationship with my in laws. She said she does not remember a time when there was not tension. And so for her, being around extended family equals tension. So now it's hard for her to imagine other people actually enjoying spending time with their extended family. Because to her, the pattern that she saw and experienced growing up that we unfortunately modeled for her was that when you go see your grandparents, it's time to get stressed out because it's going to be tense. Please don't do that to your children. Please don't. They feel the tension even when you think you are hiding it extremely well. You cannot hide everything from them if tensions are high between you and your in-laws. Children also learn about family dynamics from us in either a good way or a not so good way. They'll learn lessons about power struggles and respect and healthy relationships. They'll learn about to form and understand family boundaries. If your family doesn't have any boundaries with your in-laws, that's what it's going to be like. Chances are your children are going to repeat those patterns when they have their own families. They're also learning how we resolve conflicts. If they see your in-laws yelling and screaming and raging, throwing things, throwing a temper tantrum, that's really framing how they see adults resolving conflicts. And if your in-laws are throwing things and raging and having a temper tantrum, then they're going to think that they can act like children, like toddlers who need a nap and need a snack in order to get their way. This is a model that we are giving them, whether we want to or not, and they are receiving that will shape their future marriages. And these patterns could continue for generations. And I beg you, please break the pattern. Please be the link in the chain that breaks this cycle. Now, our discomfort is a signal that something needs attention. Our feelings of unease could be spiritual discernment. It could be a knowing that we have, that intuition that something is not right. Our anxiety might be trying to tell us something about the situation, that there's something that is not right. There's something amiss. Something is wrong with the situation. And this discomfort can be a call to growth for your entire family. It is hard to be the only one growing. It is hard to be the only one who is willing to set down boundaries and enforce them. I get it. Keep praying for your husband. Keep praying for your in laws. Pray for your marriage because we have to do something about it. We cannot let this pattern continue. We cannot stay in this anxious state, this discomfort, and just hope that things get better without doing something about it. The purpose of these trials, the purpose of these struggles, I firmly believe are just a small part of God's plan for our growth. No, I am not saying that abuse is part of God's plan. Absolutely not. I will say that how we get out of it, how we overcome it, can be what we use to grow later on. But we have to step out. We can't stay in an abusive relationship. We have to step out so that we can begin to heal, so that it can be used as part of our growth and how God uses us later on in life. Above all, I want you to remember that when we address problems with our husbands, talking about how toxic or abusive his parents are, it is so important to address these problems now in order to prevent deeper issues later. I wish that I had a resource like this when I was a newlywed. I wish I had known what was actually going on, but I was so clueless. I just thought his mom has issues with control. She has issues letting go. She is manipulative, but, she can be good. She can be kind. She can seem loving. I didn't have the words like gaslighting and narcissism or different personality disorders and different traits to look at and see that it wasn't just me. It wasn't just my perspective because I did feel very alone for a very long time. I felt like I was the only one who saw this evil side of my mother in law. And then my husband would tell stories of his childhood, of temper tantrums on vacations and different things. And it just all started falling into place. And then my physical symptoms started, and I started to get sick. And it just all culminated in just a massive explosion, crazy thing that happened where my husband finally saw. He saw that it wasn't all in my head. He saw the behavior. He saw how it was affecting our children. He saw his fears come to life of his parents trying to turn our children against us. And that's when it all hit and we went no contact. Now, it didn't get better after that. My husband still didn't see their behavior as abusive. Like I said, it's only been in the last few years that he's actually been able to use that word and not cringe and not feel like he's using it to be seen as a victim, which is weak. So it takes time. But unless we address these things, unless we bring them up in these ways that are not triggering to our husbands, in these ways that they can understand, things are not going to get better. And then if your husband is not willing to come along with you, prayers are with you because that's a very tough situation to be in. Those are situations that involve a lot of prayer. I would encourage you to talk to your priest and a therapist, preferably one who is Catholic and knows the tenets of our faith and knows what is important to us so that you can make some difficult decisions. I know that not every husband is going to be as receptive as mine. And I'm so grateful that my husband is who he is, that he was able to see his role as a husband, as a father, his vocation comes before that of being a dutiful son. And I fully acknowledge that not everybody's husband is going to do that. But that doesn't mean that you can't stand up for yourself. That doesn't mean that you can't speak up and have certain boundaries. You can still do that. You still have dignity as your own person to stand up and to be seen and to be given a level of respect that is due you just because you're a human being, but then also because you're his wife, but also because you're the mother of your children. Also because maybe you hold a role in the community and you deserve some respect. I know it's easy to throw around the words toxic and abusive, and I know they've kind of become these overused words in today's day and time. But I know that if you're listening to this podcast, those words can sometimes be right on point. And that's why you're here. And that's why I'm here. I want to be a voice of encouragement to you. I want you to be seen. I want you to feel validated because you're not alone. There are so many of us who are going through very similar things. And I want you to know that God is with you and He sees your struggles and He loves you. And He does not desire for you to be abused ever. Let us all continue to pray for our husbands to open their hearts and open their eyes and open their minds to the reality of what is going on and whether or not they ever accept the words toxic or abuse or abusive in regards to their parents. I pray that they do acknowledge that the way that they treat him, the way that they treat you and possibly your children is unacceptable. And I pray for all of our marriages to be healthy and strong just as God intended. God bless you. Go in peace. Thanks so much for tuning in to today's episode. If you've ever wondered just how toxic your relationship with your in-laws really is, I've got the perfect tool for you. Introducing the new free Toxic In-Laws Assessment, a self-graded quiz designed to help you identify the true level of toxicity in your relationship with your in-laws. Whether you're unsure if your in-laws are really that bad or you think they might be worse than you realize, this assessment will give you the clarity you need. Don't leave it to guesswork. Take the free Toxic In-Laws Assessment now and start your journey towards healthier and more peaceful family dynamics. Visit desiringpeace.com/quiz to get started. Disclaimer. All content and information on this podcast and our website, including our programs, products, and/or services, is for information and educational purposes only and does not constitute professional medical, psychiatric, or mental health advice of any kind, and does not establish any kind of professional client relationship by your listening to this podcast or use of my website. A professional client relationship with you is only formed after we have expressly entered into a written agreement with you that you have signed, including our fee structure and other terms to work with you in a specific matter. Although we strive to provide accurate general information, the information presented here is not a substitute for any kind of professional advice, and you should not rely solely on this information. Always consult a professional in the area for your particular needs and circumstances prior to making any professional, medical, or mental health related decisions.